Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to talk about one of the most commonly used things by fish breeders that is also the easiest for us to make, and that's a spawning mop. So what is a spawning mop? For some reason you don't know what that is. Basically, it's taking something like acrylic yarn like this and creating kind of a fake set of plants for fish to go near. This is most commonly for egg scatterers, to go near, spawn, and for something for the eggs to stick to. Making these is really straightforward and simple, but I don't think every tutorial out there talks about when we would use a certain type of spawning mop over another. So let's dive really quickly into the couple different types before I show you. The first kind is going to be much shorter, not as long, and that's going to be if you're doing small nanofish in a small tank. Think about your celestial pearl danios or a lot of your small nanofish like that. They don't need super long mops that go from the top of the tank all the way to the bottom. They need something a little smaller. Or maybe it's something where you want to put it into a container. You need a smaller mop. You don't need this huge mop in order to do that. On the other hand, if you have something like, say, rainbow fish, you might want a little bit larger mop, or you need that mop to have some certain differences in its construction in order to make sure if they spawn very top of the water, they're not jumping out of the tank. Let's go through the materials you're going to need in order to make a spawning mop, and then we'll go over the two most basic kinds and how you can alter those kinds to fit whatever fish you're spawning. The first thing you're going to need is acrylic yarn. Now, I happen to have a big roll of green. That's just because I play by the paranoid reason that if it looks kind of like a plant, maybe they're more likely to go into it. I also have some mops that I've gotten from breeders that are multicolored. They're cream and green and red, and there are lots of different colors inside the mop. It really doesn't matter. I just usually find the green pretty cheap. Make sure it's acrylic. Any other kind of yarn is going to slowly disintegrate in your water where acrylic will not, and you can use these mops over and over and over again. Next, you're going to need a pair of scissors. Probably sounds straightforward, you're going to be cutting yarn, but you need a pair of scissors. Depending on the type of mop you're making, if you want your mop to be a floating mop, you're going to need something like a wine cork that's been unused, this is very important, or a small piece of cut styrofoam to act as your float and to help hold the mop up in water. You can easily get bags of cork or things of styrofoam, craft stores, Amazon. Places like this are going to be great options. I think I bought my last batch of corks off of eBay, as I recall. Finally, in order to actually make the mop, you're going to need something to wrap the mop around as we're creating it. So you're going to wrap the yarn around something. A great example would be your favorite fish book, like this sweet photography book of rainbow fish from Gunther Schmiede. It's actually really cool, by the way. Or maybe you want a smaller mop. You'll make sure to find your old CD album of Pearl Jam 10. It has to be Pearl Jam. It can't be anything else or it won't work. Right. No, but, like something the size of a CD cover, you could use a DVD case. This is also good. If you want something a little, maybe thicker than that, let's say you don't have a book, you don't have a CD, you don't have DVDs. Bentley, I live purely on streaming media. What do? You probably have some scrap 2x4s lying around, and this is another great option to wrap and make a mop. So let's go through the quick steps on how to make a mop, and then we'll talk about where we want the differences in, like, say, wrapping around a 2x4 versus kind of a long book. Okay, I've got my book, I've got my yarn. This is the easy part. You're going to go the short way on your book. Thin books can help a lot, or if you have a book that has a raised cover to make sure there's a gap, it gets a little bit easier to cut when you're doing this at the end. But all you're going to do is take your yarn, like so. You'll want to find a point. I tend to take it basically the length of the book cover, and then I will grip the yarn. So I've got it like this, and then all I'm going to do is wrap around, and you don't have to be tight about this. It can be kind of loose, and you just keep wrapping. I'm not going to go through this and wrap a full mop for you guys. We're going to speed until this is done. But basically, you want to do between, I would say, 30 and 40 wraps. Anything bigger than that could be too dense. And if you want a really small mop, try only like 20 wraps. All right, now that we've got it all wrapped and you can see my softcover book warped a little bit, this is okay. Don't stress about this. If you have a hardcover book, it makes it a little easier. But you can see we've got a decent length here, a little bit longer than my hand. That's really good for, say, like my rainbow fish. Now what we're going to do is the hard part. Cut. So all you're going to do is take that. You're going to go along this edge. So the way that I do this is I will pull it off the book so that I have this bundle of yarn, right? And then all I'm doing, at the same point where the spine of the book was, I'm just going to start cutting through. Pretty easy. Now I've got each individual yarn for my mop. Here comes the fun part. So you'll want to separate them a little bit. You'll notice I have like one thread that's still here. That's kind of on purpose. I missed it. Now, for my case, I want a floating mop. So I'm going to take my float. I'm going to take the part that's still curved up here. And all you're doing is wrapping around it. But there's an easier way to do this than like this, and let me show you. So rather than wrap that big mass around a cork, what I'm going to do is take an extra piece of yarn, sometimes long, sometimes short, depends on how you're doing this, and all I'm going to do is tie this top part off. Now what a lot of people will do is they'll take a different color yarn. It makes it a little easier to spot. I was too lazy. I only bought the green stuff. So what you're going to do is you're going to tie this off. Nice and simple. So all I've done is a couple of just little twist ties, and you can see now we have a nice sinking mop ready to go into a fish tank. But if we want this to float, we add a cork or styrofoam, whichever is easier for you. So all we're going to do is get another twist knot ready, take our cork, slide it in, and tighten down. Pretty simple. We'll add a couple extra knots just to make sure this thing's really secure, but that's it. Now you have a floating mop. For every additional knot, by the way, just as a little tip, make sure you wrap around to get a little extra grip on this. All right, so I've got a couple loops, and all I'm going to do now with these extra bits of thread is I'm just going to tie them at the top here to make sure it's nice and secure, and then I have a final knot to keep all of this in place, and then we'll have a nice floating mop ready to go. There we go. There's our completed mop. And you'll notice I have a couple of strands here that are a little longer than the rest. You can, if you don't like this, just go through with your scissors, trim this part up. That's what I'm going to do in just a second. And then you'll have a nice uniform mop. Now this particular mop here is good for a lot of floating species. You'll see it's about as long as my hand, roughly 6 inches or so. This would be great for rainbow fish, anything in a taller tank. If you're doing smaller fish, you'll want to look at something a little bit smaller than that book, so the base lengths of our strand here is much smaller, and in the end it'll make a smaller mop. Now one of the other things you could do is you could leave a lot of extra room between the cork and the top of the mop. So if you have a type of fish that likes to spawn toward the very top of a mop, you'll leave a length here so you have a gap, and this will float a little down. And what you do is just trim this mop up so it's quite a bit shorter, right? Maybe the actual length is only like 4 inches of strands down here, and then you have an inch or two that this hangs down. So if the float's at the top, it hangs down into the water, and that mop's sitting kind of middle of the water column so that you don't risk your fish jumping out of your tank. Or just invest in some really good lids. All right, so here you go. Done the trimming. You can see the mop's a lot cleaner at the bottom. It's one spare strand, but that doesn't really matter that much. Now we've got our mop done, so we just throw this in the tank, right? No! Come on. We don't know how long this yarn has been wherever, even if it's been in our own house. Make sure you very thoroughly wash your mop before you ever put it in a tank. Run it over some tap water. If your tap has a lot of chloramine instead of just chlorine, you could dunk it for a soak inside of some dechlorinated water, but make sure you really thoroughly wash your mop. Every time this dries, it will take a little while to settle and sink back in to get waterlogged. Don't worry about that part, but make sure that this thing is nice and washed so you don't have some random fibers or who knows what getting into your fish tank. always wash your spawning mops. Now, let's say we wanted a mop to sink. Why would we want that? Well, for some species of cories, for example, or there's lots of other fish, maybe you don't want to have a substrate layer in your tank. You'd rather just have mops at the bottom of a bare bottom tank. You just don't include this. You tie them off real nice. This is where I would definitely use a different color twine to know like where that tie point is. You could use white, you could use red, whatever it is. Yarn is super cheap, and one thing of yarn will make 30 or 40 spawning mops. I mean, they make quite a lot. This here is 40 wraps around a book. And you can see it's dense, but it's not too thick. If fish had to, they could get through this. But the important part is it's enough to where they'll see it kind of like floating plants or roots, and they're likely to go up to this and stick their eggs to it. In the case of cories, you just let it float all the way to the bottom and sink to the ground, and you have a big massive mops. That might be where you want big, long mops. You get a huge book, or you go the height ways of your book so they're longer in order to cover more ground. I personally typically am using a floating mop, so I like slightly shorter spawning mops. I've tried longer ones in the past, and they can be kind of a pain to go pick eggs through. So use a slightly shorter mop. Between 4 and 6 inches is my suggestion. Well, there you go, guys. There is a full, quick, and easy tutorial on how to make yourself your own spawning mop. These things are incredibly cheap. Don't buy them unless you literally don't have the time to make them. This is the first mop I've made in months because my schedule's been crazy, so I understand people who would buy spawning mops for $3 or $4, or maybe you've got a friend that makes them and they're willing to do it as long as you provide materials. Whatever works, but you saw how quick we could put these together, and I mean, you're going to see edits, but this took me 10 minutes. And that was doing it slow and explaining extra stuff. If I was just trying to bang out mops as fast as possible, you could probably do one every 5 minutes. So, what I'd love to know down in the comments is, what kind of spawning mops do you use? Do you use floating mops? Do you prefer styrofoam over cork? Do you prefer sinking mops? Tell me down in the comments. I'd love to know if this tutorial helped you. I'd also love to know that. Just, hey, what part of this tutorial helped you the most when it comes to using a spawning mop? If you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a little like, a thumbs up. That really helps with the whole magic YouTube algorithm thing. And if you didn't like this video because you think the quick tips on how to make a spawning mop are obvious and why would I ever need that lesson, you can hit the thumbs down twice. I'll understand. If you're new to this channel and this is your first time seeing something, we do all sorts of how-tos, tips, plants, fish, product reviews, all sorts of stuff here. Consider subscribing so you don't miss anything. Maybe even ring that little notification bell to make sure that you see all the stuff like on the community tab where you get an option to basically tell me what I'm going to make next, because that happens regularly on the community tab. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Wash your spawning mops and stay awesome. Hey guys, this is a little extra afterward. I just wanted to highlight some of the photography in this book because I got it off of Blurb, I remember right. Gunther Schmiede is really well known in the rainbow community because he does tons of photography, and I mean, put this on there properly. Just look at the spread in this book, right? It's beautiful natural habitat, those beautiful rainbow fish, and like every page is like this. There's just it's unreal. I just picked this up because I really like Gunther Schmiede's photography for rainbow fish, and yeah, this is a small publishing platform, kind of similar to where I was planning on publishing whenever the day comes that I make a book. So no, this is not an announcement. I'm just saying I really like this book, and if you like rainbow fish, you might appreciate the beautiful photography carried within.